Hello, everyone, and welcome to a first episode of Design Development Fundamentals. My name is Kasanis. Guys, this is not going to be a weekly series or anything like that. It's really about some ideas that I have that I want to express that it's going to help my students out, really, and I'm hoping it's going to help anyone else who's watching this out as well. And whenever I make one of these videos, it'll be about an idea that's come up based on something that's happened within my class. And in this particular case, I'm directing this video towards my first years who are currently working on a capstone project, a yearly capstone project. That's something that I've implemented at Centennial in the game development program. Is every year the students do a capstone project that, uses everything they learn throughout the year or throughout their education. In this particular case, I'm talking to my first years. My first years are doing a top-down shooter. 2D top-down shooter is what they're doing, 2D assets. And I think there's a kind of a problem we're running into. This is a 14-week project, and we're going into week 7 right now. This is week 7. And one of the big problems that a lot of my students are having is still separating the idea of the game they want to make with the game they can make with the game they finally do make. And this is a big issue. A lot of us have these big ideas about the games that we want to make. We have, we play games, we love certain games, and we're like, I want to make that game. It's really important to take note of the assets and the expertise and the time that you have available in order to create a game that's within scope. So if you only have a certain amount of time, it's really important to understand that the game you want to make might not fit in with that time frame. And that's kind of the case right now that I'm seeing with a lot of my students. They have a game they want to make, then there's the game they can make. There's 5 of them on a team. They have 1 semester, 14 weeks to do it. And there's the game that they can make. They can make this game based on the things they've learned so far. Now, lastly is the game you do make. The game you do make is not the same as the game you can make. Unfortunately, even given the fact that there's expertise and there's, time to make it and everything else, oftentimes there's issues that you run into. Just life happens sometimes, and you end up making something that's a little bit lower than the game you actually could have made if everything was absolutely perfect. That's what I kind of want to talk about today. And this idea can apply to not only things like the capstone project that I'm talking about, but things like a game jam. If you're involved in a game jam, you can apply these ideas. So today I'm going to talk about a little game that I made. I made this game over one day. It was kind of a one-day jam for me. So it's not a finished game. It's really more of a prototype than anything else. But I made this game over one day. And I want to talk about the ideas that I used in order to be able to produce it in that single day. All right? So let's take a look. You have to start off with an idea. You have to have an idea of where you're going. And I'm not going to talk about the brainstorming session or anything like that right now or how to get your ideas. It's really about going from the idea that you do have into an actual game. That's what I want to talk about today. So I chose a topic based on some things that my students have chosen. A few of my student groups are working on a game that have something similar to a dash mechanic. They're not exactly the same as a dash mechanic, but they're similar to a dash mechanic. So ultimately, I decided to make a game based on that idea, a dash mechanic. That's my core mechanic. So I've identified what I want to use as my core mechanic. That means once I have this core mechanic, that everything I do, any of the secondary mechanics I add, any of the progression through the game, even any of the narrative, should really be used to kind of support that idea of that core mechanic. If your core mechanic and your core game loop are fun, you're going to have a good game. So that was kind of important to me, picking out that core mechanic. And like I said, I chose the idea of the dash. That was going to be my core mechanic. So I want to make sure that I emphasize the dash in every single way. The next thing that you want to do once you have that core mechanic in mind is you want to consider references. What do you want your game to be like? Do you have something that, I like the way this works or I like the way that works? And you want to kind of include it in your game. If you can make a game that is better than your reference, then you're all set. In this particular case, I kind of like the gameplay of Geometry Wars, a game like that, kind of like Geometry Wars. Now, like I said, I'm spending one day on this. There is absolutely no way that I'm going to produce Geometry Wars in a single day. But I'm going to use that as my reference. I kind of like the hectic nature of Geometry Wars. I kind of like that mass attack that they've kind of got in Geometry Wars where everything's kind of chasing you and you've got to shoot it before it gets to you. So I'm going to go with that idea. I'm going to go with that game feel. So with that in mind, what you need to do is you need to prototype your core mechanic. That's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to prototype my core mechanic. Now, there's a few other parameters you have to decide upon once you decide you're going to prototype your core mechanic. First of all, you have to understand the type of game you're creating. In this particular case, as I've already mentioned, I'm making a 2D top-down style game. And you have to decide the type of control that you're going to be using. I've opted to use a console controller. My students are working on a console controller game, so I'm going to do the same thing. In this particular case, I kept things really, really simple. I prototyped my character, and I prototyped the dash movement. I added in a few little extras here, like I've got a particle system and kind of a sound that gives me some feedback as well. But you can see the character itself is able to dash around, and that's what I wanted to make sure I could have happen. I wanted the dash to work, and knowing the dash works means that I can then go ahead and implement the game. So in this particular case, as I've already mentioned, I thought it was really important that I had something that was like Geometry Wars. And my original idea, I thought that maybe I would make this into a multiplayer game in which everyone is kind of fighting against each other. Everyone is kind of operating a character like this. I would make it local multiplayer. That was the idea I was originally going for. Now, again, as I started off, I started working towards the idea. I realized that it was too large of a scope for the time frame I had. I don't have weeks to make this game. I have hours to make this particular game. I have other things that I need to do in life sometimes other than just work. So I opted for a couple of ideas. What I decided to do was to create a character similar to the one I've got here and kind of make a combat game where the characters were trying to hit each other in the rounded area, and that's how you'd kill someone. You'd hit them with your pointed nose, and in hitting them with your pointed nose, you then would be able to destroy your foe. So that's what I did. I decided this was going to be a combat game and that my core loop was going to be combat, and therefore I really had to test the combat to see if it was any fun. It's really important once you've got your game idea, once you've got a core mechanic that you think, yes, this core mechanic works, is to test the core game loop. Prototype your core game loop very, very quickly. In this particular case, I had originally thought I was going to make a multiplayer game, and I realized I don't have the number of controllers at home. I don't have the number of controllers to be able to test the things and the people to test the things that I want to be able to test here. So instead, I opted for a simple AI enemy, a really simplistic AI-based enemy. My enemy was going to rotate towards the player at a particular rate. It would then dash towards the player. It was exactly the same as the player itself, so in every way it's the same. I've got a vulnerable area on the back of the enemy. I've got a point in the front of the enemy that I can use to try and hit the player's vulnerable area. There, I just hit his. And in hitting it, it's going to give you points. I kind of decided that early on as well. Hitting him in the front, hitting the enemy in the arrow wasn't going to do anything. So I was able to do this relatively quickly. I set it up so that the enemy had different AI abilities, so there was a variance in how fast it rotated, there was a variance in how often it dashed, that kind of thing, to make the enemies a little less predictable. Now, again, I found that this enemy was kind of difficult. It was kind of difficult to fight this particular enemy. It was a difficult game. And there's a couple of things that I like to do once I've decided on what the obstacle is or what the challenge is in a particular game. I like to think through and say, okay, are there 3 different difficulty levels that I can add to this challenge in order to make it more challenging as I move forward? As my abilities get better, to remain within the flow channel, how can I make this more challenging as my players gain experience? So I like to think of 3 different levels of difficulty for any given challenge that I create. If I can come up with 3 challenges and 3 different difficulty levels of each challenge, suddenly you've got yourself a game, and you've got a lot of combinations there that can be used to create a really interesting and in-depth game. In this particular case, I don't have time for 3 challenges. I'm going to make a combat-based game where I dash into my opponents to destroy them. But I still want to have 3 different levels of difficulties to allow for that kind of teach, test, challenge idea where I teach my players how to do something, I then test their ability, and then finally I give them a good challenge that they're going to have to try and compete with. So in this particular case, I realized that my core game loop was going to be fun. I realized that my core mechanic was going to work, and therefore I have to work on the challenges. And again, I recommend this for any game jam you go into as well. Come up with those 3 different levels of difficulty, and suddenly you've got yourself a game that you can progress through. So, With this particular enemy, I found this enemy quite difficult. It wasn't easy to beat the enemy, and if I had multiple, it'd be very much more difficult. I decided that this enemy, the enemy just like me, was going to be the third level of difficulty, which means I needed 2 easier ones first. That first level of difficulty has to be something your player can handle relatively easily. You don't want it to be overly challenging. You don't want the player to be overwhelmed by these initial mechanics. You really want to teach your player how to play your game with that first level of difficulty. Or if it's a new mechanic, you want to teach your player how to use that mechanic with the easiest level of difficulty. In this particular case, what I decided to do was to create an enemy that wasn't able to actually harm you. So I removed the point from the attacking character, and that this thing works exactly the same way. It will dash towards you. It has a very slow turn radius, so it doesn't dash directly towards you. It kind of dodges you, which I liked. It dodges away from you. Even though it's trying to aim at me, it's dodging before it's actually aiming towards me. I set it up so this couldn't harm me in any way. If it hits me, or I hit it, I will kill it and I will get the points for that character. So you can see there that I'm getting the points. That is the first level of difficulty. A level that started off the game, I would start off the game by showing the player, okay, this character here is not going to be able to harm you. Go ahead and kill them off, learn the mechanics. The second, or the medium difficulty of challenge, I want something that can actually harm the player in some way. The player has an opportunity to fail here, and I had to think of what that might mean. I removed the dash mechanic, and I kept the idea of the character having to slam into the enemy to kill it. I want to keep my same combat throughout the entire thing. But in this particular case, what I added instead was a cannon. So if my player can dodge a cannon here, there's cannon fire that'll occur. Again, the character simply aims at the enemy, aims at the player, and they will shoot off a bullet. Now again, there's a variance in how quickly the characters will rotate, how often they fire, that kind of thing, to make these things a little bit more random. So you can see here that they're producing a bullet. That bullet, if it touches the player, will kill them. But again, I can stay relatively easily ahead of that bullet. I didn't set up so that it is overly difficult to dodge the bullet. And again, if I strike that character with my nose, then again, I'm going to kill it. You can see that I'm getting the points that are coming across there. Boom. All right, so each of these things here, this is my second level of challenge. There is a possibility of failure here. If that player shoots me, if that enemy shoots me, my character will die. It's stationary, however, so that makes it much more easy for me to hit, much less difficult for me to beat, but still more difficult, obviously, than the first challenge. Not anywhere near as difficult as the enemy who's chasing me and trying to hit me with a protective shell. So that gave me 3 levels of difficulty. It gave me the easy, the medium, and the hard. Once I had the 3 challenge levels, and I understood that my dash mechanic was going to work, and I understood what the core game loop was, I was all set. I had my 3 difficulty levels. I knew the dash was going to work great. I knew that the core game loop, that of slamming into my enemies, was going to be great. Oh, great. It was going to be fine. It was going to be a game. I now had to just simply decide how I was going to present all of this to my player. How was my player going to learn the mechanic? How was my player going to be able to progress through the different levels? And because of the way I set up the different challenges, progression through the levels wouldn't be that difficult. So I was able to create the final game utilizing these ideas. All right, let's take a quick look at the final game. Okay, everybody, this is the final game. This is kind of the culmination of a couple of hours of work. I treat it like a game jam, so you can see it's a little bit rough. Some of the graphics are rough, and what have you. But I really wanted to finish this up relatively quickly. I decided, instead of adding a tutorial, that I would let my player kind of discover how to play. I added the graphic at the top that just demonstrates the controls you had to use. I then set up so they could explore the controls. If you utilize the thumbstick, well, okay, I figured I can turn around. This is really teaching my player how to play the game right here. This is the tutorial all kind of built into one, which is great. If I press the start here, well, okay, well, it launches this thing here. In this particular case, I just set it up so that my students would be able to see that there was options to set it up so you can control a menu through the controller. In this particular case, I'm only controlling volume, and I've got it set up there. So once again, there's a little icon indicating what you're going to use in order to be able to set it. This automatically sets the player prefs. The player prefs then automatically stores your information, and then your volume will be set each time. If I push the button again, I end up back here. So the only button left to push is the dash button. If I press the dash button, okay, I've got a little dash going on here. So it's really teaching my player how to play the game right here. If I dash into the play, guess what? The game is going to start. So I'm using that menu as a tutorial for my players. Now, if we take a look at what I did here, I set it up so that it was start off with just the easy characters and move through waves. So I'm now introducing the medium difficulty characters here. Once I kill off all but one, I move on to the next wave. Each time I go to a new wave, it introduces a new character. In this particular case, I now have several of the medium characters as well as one of the hard characters that I'm fighting against. And again, I will start a new wave once I've defeated all but one. There we go. And now, okay, I'm gonna die here. I don't want to turn my back on him. Go. I've got it set up so that it increases the number of enemies that you face each time. The number of enemies of a particular type of enemy increases each time. So in this particular case now I have multiple of the easy, multiple of the hard, and as well as multiple of the medium. So that's the progression as we go through. And I set it up so that at one point you kind of hit a ceiling. You won't continue to have more and more and more because obviously it'll be too difficult and become frustrating. Boom. All right, let's see how far I can get here. See if I can kill these guys off. I just gotta try. These guys here are. Nah, I lost. These guys are pretty hard. You have to try and get in behind them. But that's really basically the way the game works. I was able to teach the player here. I was able to progress very slowly through the gameplay itself by introducing only a couple of the enemies at any given time. To make sure that the player then would learn. They would face more and more challenge as they went. But they would still have the opportunity to learn. Sometimes you fail, though, like I just did there. And that's pretty much it, guys. That is pretty much it. I taught the player through the menu exactly how to play the game. I kept everything really simple. This is a really easy way of going through and making a game jam game as well. Something like this works really, really well. Again, my idea was to take one idea, just my core mechanic, push that core mechanic as far as I could, use it for everything. Afterwards, I tested my core game loop to make sure that the combat, in this particular case, would be fun. Afterwards, I created 3 different difficulty levels of my challenge. That's going to allow me to create gameplay, progressive gameplay as well. So with all that done, guys, I was able to create my game. I hope this was helpful for you. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it helps you with your game jam, or if you're one of my students, it helps you focus on your project. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know down below with a thumbs up. If you didn't, a thumbs down is perfectly fine. I'm really not making these videos with any kind of consistency anymore. I'm doing them just because I feel like it and just because I'm having fun doing so again. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know down below. I'd love to hear from you. Tell me about the games that you're creating. All right, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day.